Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, a little short week for us here as we get ready for Thanksgiving, but not short on information. As always, Morgan and I are going through the rundown of today's show. It is packed.
I don't think we'll get to it all.
No.
But, have you seen that joke going around? I've seen it. It's made me laugh a couple times. I've seen it a couple times. It says, don't forget to set your scale back 15 pounds on Wednesday for the Thanksgiving holiday.
You know what we're doing this year? Finally, I talked my wife into
Turkey trot?
Just Chinese food for Thanksgiving.
Just Chinese food. Oh, interesting.
We're not doing any big deal this time at all.
In honor of the Hong Kong elections, no
Yes.
doubt. Yeah. Which hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about today. But, and we got, we rattled through 20 stories maybe.
Yeah, I think that's what your goal is right now.
I don't know if we'll make it. But anyway, let's start off and take a quick look back. Just wanted to mention a few things about old Prince Andrew. And I'll tell you, things are not getting any better for poor Randy Andy, are they? I'd say ever since he did that BBC interview, I guess that was about a week and a couple of days ago. I mean, he's just been in trouble.
PR move.
Woo. Well, because he did a terrible job in the interview. Remember, he had that kind of lame-o explanation that he wasn't capable of sweating because of
Right.
He once got shot at in the Falklands War, and it scared him so bad that he couldn't sweat anymore.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there were all those photos popping up of him sweating.
I wonder how much talk there'll be at the Thanksgiving table at the palace this year.
Oh, I bet you, yes. He even invited? I'm not sure. Not sure.
The other thing that is ridiculous, if you think about it, if you really haven't done anything wrong and you're Prince Andrew or whomever, it's very easy to talk to a reporter or whomever and say, look, this was an influential guy. He was charismatic, and he kind of sucked us in, and I'm not the only one who got sucked in. Look at all these other people.
Look at all these young ladies who got sucked in, right? I mean, come on. He sucked everybody in. I was a victim, too. It's funny because he's been retired. Actually, he's been booted out of Buckingham Palace. All of the major royals, not all the royals, but all the major royals have private offices there in Buckingham Palace and staffs and everything else. Well, his offices have been closed. His flag has been taken down from the standard. He's been put out on his rear end for a royal. I mean, I'm sure he's still doing fine. He's still driving a Bentley, that kind of. But in royal status terms, he has really been thrown out. And then I heard they've actually canceled his big birthday party, which was set for his birthday is February 19th. So just a couple of months in the future, he was having a big 60th birthday bash, and the Queen has put the kibosh on that. She's canceled that, and I heard Prince Charles is involved also, his older brother, Prince Charles, who's
involved
in line
in the
to
canceling?
be. Yeah, is in line to be king, and he's like, you got to go. You got to go, buddy. Another interesting fact, and then we'll move on just because I think this is fascinating stuff, and you got to go out and watch his BBC interview because, he says things like he doesn't hug women, he never hugs people in public, and of course there are all these photos of him with his arms around women at parties, and these are some of the same photos where he appears to be sweating, although not profusely, but he definitely appears to be sweating. And then he's got a photo of him kind of like loosening his collar as he walks with a lady who's, not fully clothed at one of these, hoity-toity parties. It kind of looks like Eyes Wide Shut stuff, frankly. If you want to go look at that photo. But one fact that I thought was interesting is it's just now come out that apparently Ghislaine Maxwell went to Buckingham Palace in June of this year. In fact, June 6th, so slightly before
Not that long ago.
Epstein started getting back into trouble. Because remember, it all happened very fast this year when the story came back out that Epstein was back under investigation. So now what in the world do you think Ghislaine Maxwell, who hasn't been seen in public hardly at all in the last couple of years, except for that one time at the In-N-Out Burger with the altered photograph in August of this year, supposedly, what was she doing going to Buckingham Palace to meet with Prince Andrew, I wonder?
Interesting.
Think they might be getting their story straight?
Well, one thing I did read about Ghislaine, is that how you say her name?
Yeah,
Okay.
we've had a million different pronunciations. That's the correct one.
I'm going with your pronunciation. And so they said it was a security guard, I believe, at Epstein's home in Nevada. And he was saying that there were video cameras in all of those rooms and that that Ghislaine had access to all those videos, presumably, and that's why she's MIA. That's why nobody's going to bring her in, because nobody wants to, because she's got too much dirt on everybody.
Nobody wants to find out.
That was this one particular security guard's tape.
That's right. They don't want to find out exactly what videos that she's got. Well, the Epstein story continues to raise controversy as well. And, a guy who I'm a big fan of, Attorney General William Barr, has just recently come out and tried to kind of tamp some of that controversy down and said, listen, I also was suspicious when I first heard about it, but now I've kind of reviewed the evidence. I've looked at the video footage. Of course, I didn't think there was video footage, but apparently he says he's looked at the video footage and nobody came and went from the cell. And I believe that he believes that, definitely. I'm still not convinced, but he says, look, this was just the perfect storm of screw-ups. And that's a direct quote, the perfect storm of screw-ups. So I don't know. I'm still highly, highly suspicious of the situation, as are most people that I run into, frankly. I don't run into hardly anybody that thinks that Epstein actually killed himself. Although I did talk to one guy who's a criminal defense lawyer, and he's like, you'd be surprised at how easy it is to, strangle yourself. It's basically if you could just hold out long enough, then you kind of reach a point of no return and you do pass out. Yeah, but do you break this? Then do several bones in your neck break from the strangulation?
Says the person who's still alive.
Yeah, exactly. Now, lest you think that we're by ourselves in thinking this, I mean, a number of prominent politicians have actually come out and said that they think there's something up with the Epstein case. And I'm thinking of Representative Paul Gosar from Arizona, who's a Republican. He actually tweeted out a series of 23 different tweets. And the first letter of each tweet, if you then put those together, spelled out like Epstein didn't kill himself. And so, and some reporter figured that out and is like, look what he did. And he, very sly move there. And then you've got Louisiana Senator John Kennedy, him from some of the various hearings. He's quite a well-spoken guy. Anyway, he made the funny comment the other day, and he said, drywall, Christmas ornaments, and Epstein are three things that don't hang themselves. So even our U.S. representatives and senators are coming out and essentially saying, hey, we don't buy it. Well, I mean, come on. It's just so suspicious. It's just so suspicious. So I get that they don't think they really have any evidence, although there is the evidence like we've just talked about. I mean, his own brother said he had been, very high spirits, apparently, according to the lawyers and everybody else, and that he didn't think there was any way that Epstein would have killed his brother would have killed himself. Right. Remember, he's the one that paid Michael Baden to sit in on the autopsy.
This is just going to be added to who killed Hoffa, who really killed Kennedy.
It'll never end.
It'll never end. We'll never get the real story.
Right. Meanwhile, Epstein's probably sitting on a beach in the Middle East, I heard somebody say. Well, I don't know how many beaches there are. Maybe in Dubai or something. So, well, maybe one day we'll find out what happened. And there are so many stories like that, as you mentioned a couple of them, but there are even more, including what happened with some of our investigations that our government was running against political candidates, specifically President Trump before he was president. What was the deal with that? And hopefully soon, I mean, maybe in a couple of weeks, the report is going to come out from Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. Now, I've heard a lot of people saying don't put too much hope into that report because, the last one he came out with was kind of a whitewash. Remember, it had all this, if you actually read into it, it went one way, and then if you just read the conclusion, which is kind of what everybody picked up on, it said, nothing to see here. So we worry about this could be a repeat of that kind of a delivery where, the facts really do indicate that something was going on. And we've gotten a couple of leaks that recently, and we don't know if this is the extent of kind of what he found in terms of bad conduct or not, but we have gotten the leaks. And the name of one FBI lawyer has come out over the past weekend, and that's Kevin Kleinsmith. If you've heard that name in the news, and maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but he's an FBI lawyer who's apparently been referred for criminal prosecution now because he actually faked an email. So I guess he had a real email, and then he added stuff to the real email, so he forged additional content into the email. And they submitted that as part of the FISA application, Foreign Intelligence Services Act, to spy on Carter Page, which, remember, then gave them the right to basically spy on the entire Trump campaign because of the two-hop rule. So Kevin Kleinsmith faked an email that went into the FISA application. Now, who did Kevin Kleinsmith work for directly? Peter Strzok. You remember that name? Peter Strzok was the FBI agent who was running like every major investigation they had. Kevin Kleinsmith was also on those investigations, the mid-year exam where they were looking into Hillary Clinton and her email server, her homebrew server, as well as the investigation of Trump, the counterintelligence work that they were doing against Trump. Kevin Kleinsmith lets you think Peter Strzok was the only one. Kevin Kleinsmith also had a girlfriend at the FBI, but it wasn't Lisa Page. It was somebody named Sally Moyer. And I tell you what a bunch of lovebirds.
We're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And Morgan, I want to dig into a little bit more about Kevin Kleinsmith, former FBI lawyer, and he has gotten himself into some trouble.
Yeah, and apparently when President Trump won the election, he sent around an email to somebody, and it basically said, my blankety-blank name is all over all that paperwork, because he was scared. He's scared, I'm going to be found out. Maybe the president is going to fire me. And maybe he's also scared. Maybe I'm going to be criminally indicted, which, let's face it, if you forged an email, if you made up evidence, you work for the FBI and you made up evidence about an American citizen to get these super invasive spying powers put into gear against an American citizen, my goodness, shouldn't you face some kind of criminal charges? That's got to be basic level, or we literally don't have any law and order, even though we've got these law enforcement organizations running around doing whatever they want. And it's to the point where you see how they've treated President Trump. Anything that he does, when he tweets out during the impeachment hearings something about one of the witnesses, and, basically it's not a threat. It just says everywhere she went, it basically turned into a disaster. Then you've got them saying, "Oh, this is intimidation of a witness," and this is terrible. It's criminal what he's doing. Well, actually, first of all, no, it's not. And if you look at the underlying facts, it's not intimidation of a witness. It's the expression of an opinion, which under the First Amendment he's allowed to do. It's not like he said, "Boy, if she doesn't shut up, she might disappear." Now that might be intimidation of a witness, but that's not at all what he said. But you've got them weaponizing the criminal justice system against their enemies, and they use it against their enemies, but now when it comes time to look at them, take a look at their conduct, then they don't want that to go forward. And it's the same thing that we've seen with Andrew McCabe and all the leaks that he made, and he was not candid. He lacked candor. For us, that'd be called lying to the FBI. For him, even though he lied to the FBI, he lacked candor, and, we're going to demote him. Well, if it was me or you folks, we'd be in jail. We'd be in jail for like 5 or 10 years for lying to the FBI if we did what Andrew McCabe did. The guy was selectively leaking information from active FBI investigations. That's a crime in and of itself. Then he lied about it. Remember, they can't even talk about these investigations when you call them before Congress. We had Rod Rosenstein in there. Everybody else, I can't even believe you're asking me about this investigation. We couldn't possibly talk about these things while they're ongoing because the sanctity of our investigation is so important to us. But then over here, on the other side, they're leaking out details that they want to get out. What a bunch of hypocrites, and frankly, what a bunch of criminals. And then you add to it, I just think it's tragically comical, this whole thing with the girlfriends. Does everybody at the FBI got a boyfriend or girlfriend also at the FBI, some of whom are married, some of whom aren't married?
Hey, they work long hours.
They work long hours. That's a great excuse, right? So, I'm just wondering, when do they have time to do their investigatory work? You're supposed to be investigating crimes, not your coworker. And we'll just leave it at that. But anyway, it just strikes me that these guys are all, and gals, are all involved in the exact same investigations, right?
Right.
They're all on that mid-year exam of Hillary Clinton emails. You're talking about Peter Strzok, Kevin Kleinsmith. They're all on the Crossfire Hurricane allegedly counterintelligence investigation against then candidate Trump. You got Peter Strzok. You got Kevin Kleinsmith. You got Sally Moyer, Kevin Kleinsmith's alleged girlfriend, and we don't know, for sure that she was his girlfriend. That hasn't been admitted yet. That's just what's been alleged and reported. They also both worked for the guy who's now the intelligence community inspector general, right? Michael Atkinson. I mean, they both worked for Atkinson, who's the guy who was involved in switching up the whistleblower application. And Roxanne, as you're pointing out, they both also worked on the Mueller investigation. Mm-hmm. And Kleinsmith was actually removed from the Mueller investigation for his biased conduct, his biased messages. I mean, these people were 100% never Trumpers. It's in their personal emails. It's in their online posts. It's in their instant messages back and forth, their SMS messages back and forth. They couldn't stand Trump. They never wanted him to be president. They thought that it would be an absolute tragedy if he ever became president. And just like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page discussed in their text message, where they finally were honest about things, because they're not being honest now, but where they finally were honest with each other, and they said that just like they talked about in Andy's office, Andrew McCabe, they had to have an insurance policy against President Trump being elected and against the American people being so stupid as to vote for this terrible, terrible person. And so that's exactly what they did. They faked emails. They cooked up these FISA things because they were just sure if they could go through all the communications that President Trump had and all his staff had, they were certain they would find something. And all they needed to do was find something to hang their hat on, and that was their insurance policy. The problem for them is they really didn't find anything, right? I mean, that's why the 2.5-year Russia investigation totally fizzled out. There was no collusion, and frankly, there was no obstruction, although people take issue with the obstruction. Well, I mean, if there was no conspiracy, no collusion to begin with, then where's the obstruction of justice in fighting back against that investigation? Okay, now maybe reasonable minds can disagree about that, but there was absolutely no collusion. There was no involvement ever established between the Trump campaign and the Russians to affect the election, to steal the DNC emails, all these allegations. Remember, we've heard them all. We've heard, Clapper and Brennan saying, well, there's definitely something there. I mean, at one point, Brennan, earlier this year, I think it was in February, and I know we have the clip somewhere in my archive, but I'm not going to go digging for it right now. But in February this year, remember, he said, beware the Ides of March, remember? And that he thought Robert Mueller would indict maybe the week before so as to avoid that old phrase, the old Roman phrase, beware the Ides of March, that he'd probably indict maybe the first week of March, because the Ides of March is the middle of March. And so we've just got example after example. And now it's spun forward into the Schiff show, right, the impeachment hearings, at which not a single witness has said that there's any evidence of a quid pro quo.
I know we're going to get into the impeachment hearings, but before we do, quick question to wrap that up.
Yeah.
Do you think the FBI on paper should have some sort of, in part of their hiring process, aren't you supposed to be a candidate who doesn't have strong leanings toward one party or the other? Isn't the protection of and sanctity of the country paramount to that?
Well, I think that was one of the original ideals, supposedly. Of course, we remember back how the FBI started in some of their history, and I mean, they've basically always been political. But I know that prior to President Obama, there was this idea that they should not be politicized. But I think during the Obama years, all of the government service and the military was highly politicized. And we're going to talk some about that in the story we're going to hear about later with respect to the military and some of the things that have been going on there. But it's the weaponization of these bureaucracies against your political opponents. And that's what we saw. And I don't think the President Obama's administration was not involved in this. They were. Remember the text messages back and forth between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok saying that the White House wants to be kept fully apprised of everything that's going on? This is not some rogue operation. This is something this is something that is being run by the commander-in-chief. And it is the use of the full power of the state to investigate people against your political opponents. And I think that's really sad. It's really sad. But that's the world that we live in today. And we're seeing even more evidence of it with these impeachment hearings, which this is just like a show trial. I mean, they're completely railroading this, but they can't even get it to a successful conclusion. That's what's so hilarious.
You almost want it to keep going because there's just going to be something next.
I mean, it's just a train wreck. And
Right.
Every witness that they've had has had to admit that, well, we don't know of any actual quid pro quo. We don't have any direct evidence. But my speculation is I just assumed that's what had to be going on. I mean, that's what Ambassador Sondland said, right? And they make him out to be Trump's buddy. That's not correct. He's not Trump's buddy. In fact, he was a never-Trumper at one point, refused to be associated with the Trump campaign. He only started being a quote-unquote Trump supporter after President Trump won the election. That's when he decided to donate $1 million to the inauguration committee. And, before that, he was a Jeb Bush guy. He was a never-Trumper. He refused to even be associated with giving money to President Trump. And you can find all of this in the news if you dig. Well, you can still find it. I mean, at some point, Google will make sure that you can't. But for right now, you can. We'll talk some more about that when we come back.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Thanks for hanging out with us. If you want to call Morgan, 888-404-1010. That's the number to get on the line. I'm Roxanne Wilder. Pat George is here. And we were talking quite a bit about impeachment. I just happened to pull up this article about what it would cost the taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a very modest amount. $2 million or more is what Go Banking Rates has come up with.
Got to be more than that, right? Didn't we spend something like $30 million? I know we did on the Robert Mueller investigation.
Right.
And so just add it all up. And then what's the cost to the country of the Democrats getting nothing done in the House? This whole time, all they've been doing this entire time since they won the midterms and they took control of the House of Representatives, they have done nothing but investigate President Trump. How about passing the USMCA, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada agreement? The replacement for NAFTA, the trade deal that we all always wanted. Remember how bad everybody was saying, including the Democrats, was saying NAFTA was for the country? Now we've got on the table a trade deal that works for America, and they won't even take it up. Nancy Pelosi says she doesn't see how they'll have time to take it up this year. Well, how long do you think these other countries feel like waiting on this? I mean, this has been going on for almost a full year now. And we've got, the Democrats, all of the Congress, they give themselves so much time off. They got plenty of time off. They're off this whole week. They're not even coming back till December 2nd, right? Must be nice. And then December 2nd, they'll have 8 working days because remember, they only work 4 days a week. Again, must be nice. They'll work 4 days a week. So they're going to have 8 working days before they recess for the Christmas holidays. Then they won't come back until next year. In 8 days, they're not going to be able to accomplish anything on their whole impeachment sham, right? I mean, at some point, they claimed they would let Donald Trump and the Republicans call witnesses. They claimed they would let them cross-examine the witnesses. They just also claim that time, the time for that hasn't even come yet. So when are they going to have that part of it? Then when are they going to put together the report, or is all this just a foregone conclusion? Is the report already been put together by Adam Schiff and his staff, and anything that the Republicans might want to do or Donald Trump might want to do in defense of himself, they're not even going to listen to? I mean, it just absolutely floors me. But I want to point out the fact that not a single witness said that there was a quid pro quo, had no direct evidence. In fact, when Ambassador Sondland gave this 25-minute opening statement.
Isn't that what it's all about?
Exactly. Well, and remember, then they switched it because the Democrats did some polling, and they found people don't understand quid pro quo, so let's call it bribery instead. So now they're calling it bribery. But just think about this. Ambassador Sondland, during his entire opening statement, doesn't reveal the one direct conversation that he had with President Trump, where he asked President Trump, what do you want from Ukraine? And President Trump said what? He said, I don't want anything. I don't want a quid pro quo. Just tell them to do the right thing. Tell them to do what they ran on and do what they got elected to do, which is root out corruption. Okay, so there is no quid pro quo. Nobody's established it. It's all a bunch of double hearsay and suspicion and supposition. And I'll tell you what, the media buildup, I mean, it's been going on the entire time President Trump's been in office, hasn't it? They're talking about the bombshell. Today was a game changer. The testimony today was a game changer. Wow, things are really getting bad for President Trump. Now, they're still using the same lines, and we've run those audio clips. I mean, we ran that 6 months ago, the audio clip of all the times that they've said that. And folks, we just don't believe them, and hopefully you don't believe them either. Well, we got a couple of more stories we do want to get to, and unfortunately, we only have the 1 hour here, but we wanted to cover some, and it hasn't reached the level yet of impeachment proceedings over there in Israel, but the media in Israel is trying to do the same thing against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, he's been indicted now by the Attorney General of Israel. He's been indicted for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? Sounds really terrible. But when you dig into what he actually is alleged to have done, it's really not very bad at all. In fact, it kind of parallels what they're doing to President Trump. I mean, okay, so he accepted a bunch of cigars and some fine alcohol, some champagne and other things over a long period of time. He accepted cigars. I mean, that's bribery.
That's it.
That's one of the charges. They have 3 charges. That's one of them. Another charge was that he had some dealings with Israel Hayom, which is a newspaper in Israel that's owned by Sheldon Adelson, and that as part of that, he had potentially made a deal with them for favorable coverage, but they never followed through. There was no deal actually struck. But there was a discussion, allegedly, that perhaps something could be done to receive more favorable coverage. Okay. Now, can you imagine that? A politician trying to get favorable coverage from a news organization? Oh, my gosh, throw him out of office. String him up. I can't believe he did that. The last charge is based on his relationship with another news organization, and allegedly he was going to approve a merger of their parent company with another major news organization in the state of Israel in exchange for favorable coverage on the Walla news site, which is an Israeli news site. The only problem with that whole charge is the merger had already been approved before these discussions took place. So, basically they got the same amount of stuff on Prime Minister Netanyahu over there in Israel that they've got on President Trump here, and yet he's being indicted. The media is calling for him to resign, et cetera, et cetera. But let me tell you what, you ask the Israeli people, by and large, and they support him. And that's kind of like what's going on here.
You forgot the 3 free Uber rides, too, that he had.
That's right. I mean, he logged into the app.
Gave 5 stars. So
he logged into the app, and it gave him a free ride. Oh, my gosh. I can't believe it. Indict the man. Throw him out of office. Well, hopefully, the Israeli Attorney General, Mandelblit, does the right thing. Now, so far, hasn't done it, right? Could have walked away from this much earlier. But hopefully at some point he really takes a hard look at this and decides to drop the charges, because this kind of weaponization of the media and weaponization of the bureaucracy of the state against politicians just because you don't agree with their politics, this is apparently the new normal that we're living in. This is the way I guess things are going to be from now on. I wanted to cover a little bit more of that because we had, if you remember, one of the impeachment witnesses here in the United States was a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. You remember that? He's the Ukrainian-born guy. Remember, he was allegedly offered 3 separate times to go over to the Ukraine and be the Ukrainian defense minister. That's what he testified to, that he was offered 3 separate times and turned them down. Why in the world were they offering this guy to come over and be their defense minister? You talk about potential corruption. You talk about somebody who needs to have some kind of counterintelligence investigation. I mean, what in the world made them even think that they would get anywhere with that offer to somebody who's an active member of our armed services? But of course, during his testimony, he had to wear his Army uniform, and he, he is somewhat decorated. I mean, he does have a Purple Heart, and a lot of people are saying you can't question him because of his service. He's such a good person. He's a good American. He's a hero, and how dare you question him at all? Well, let me tell you some of the other stuff that the guy said. Remember, he said that he told the Ukrainians essentially to disregard what was coming from President Trump, just to disregard that part of the relationship and instead to just trust him and go with what he had to say. So he was directly undermining the commander-in-chief. Now, why he hasn't been asked for his resignation from the National Security Council? I mean, the guy who never wears, by the way, he never wears his Army uniform to any National Security Council meetings. He always wears just a regular suit. But when he goes to testify, trying to string President Trump up in this alleged quid pro quo with Ukraine, when he goes to testify, all of a sudden he pulls out his Army uniform and puts it on. I mean, that to me, I am surprised, and I really hope that the Pentagon does something about his insubordination to the commander-in-chief and his attempt to use his rank and his military uniform to bolster his testimony against the commander-in-chief. And let me tell you, there's a basis finally for this, because we actually saw over the weekend, we saw the Pentagon do something about an insubordinate commander in the military. And I don't know if you heard about this, Pat. This was exactly.
Oh, yes, I heard about this.
Well, all right, folks, if you didn't hear about this, let me tell you just a little bit about it. The guy who was the Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, also used to be, by the way, a Goldman Sachs executive, but the Secretary of the Navy had allegedly gone to the White House, and apparently this has now been established to the level with which the Secretary of Defense feels comfortable acting on the information. Now, Richard Spencer, the Secretary of the Navy, was not saying any of this publicly. In fact, he was taking different public positions. But he apparently went to the White House and said, look, if you will just stay out of the Eddie Gallagher case, I'll make sure. You know who Eddie Gallagher is? He was that Navy SEAL who was charged with murder of an ISIS combatant and other crimes, other war crimes allegedly, and ended up being convicted of having his picture taken with a corpse, which, is not technically allowed, but it's also not the worst thing in the world. I mean, war is pretty nasty stuff. So he allegedly got his picture taken, and I guess that was established and that was proved. But the murder charges, he was acquitted of those charges. Now, this is the guy that Eddie Gallagher served in the U.S. Navy for 19 years. He did 8 tours of duty overseas, 6 of them as a Navy SEAL. He's one of the best SEAL operators on the planet, and those are some great operators. And Pat, as you know, how tough that Special Forces guys are and how tough their job is.
And there aren't many of them.
And a lot of people just frankly can't do it. They're not cut out for it. So now here's one of our best war fighters, one of the best, and they're bringing down all this negative power of the administration of the U.S. Navy onto him. And so what they were going to do is they were going to force him to retire, demote him, take away his trident. In other words, take away his ability to say he was a Navy SEAL. I mean, what an insult to this man after what he's done for this country. Well, the Secretary of the Navy went in and said, White House, President Trump, if you'll stay out of it, I'll make sure he gets to retire with his trident. Excuse me? Who do you work for, buddy? You're talking to the commander-in-chief. If I'll stay out of it? And this got back to the SecDef, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, and Esper yanked him. He said, you're fired. Give me your resignation right now. I've lost confidence in you. You have been insubordinate. You cannot go to your commander and try to cut some side deal And by the way, he didn't even run it through the SecDef. He didn't even run it through the Pentagon, what he was doing on the side. He just decided he was going to be in charge. He was going to make the decision. And he was going to essentially blackmail his commander-in-chief to stay out of it. What a jerk. Glad he's gone.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show, we're going out there, and we're doing sort of a round robin out there today.
But wait, there's more,
yes.
as we were saying.
But wait, there's more.
So many things to cover today. We didn't get to talk. We are going to talk a little bit about the Hong Kong elections in just a minute. But
I tied Schreiner up in the back. He's giving you you got the next hour.
Yeah. Well, just wanted to mention to you, if you didn't see it, you got to go out there and check out Tesla's new Cybertruck. I mean, did you see it, Pat George?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
No, it looks like a giant triangle, doesn't it?
Ugh.
Silver triangle. It's like the DeLorean had an out of wedlock child or something, and that's the Tesla Cybertruck. It's not very attractive, frankly. But what was even less attractive was the whole demonstration that they did, because they said, it's got bulletproof glass. Like the side of it, you hit it with a sledgehammer and it doesn't even dent in the glass. The glass is bulletproof. And show them, just take this little metal ball and throw it at the driver's side window. And so one of the engineers does that as Musk is standing up there, instantly shatters the window.
Oops.
He's, try it again. Don't throw it as hard. And you could see the guy couldn't throw it any more softball and actually have the metal ball go over and hit the rear window on the driver's side. Also shattered. Oh. That's a demonstration they probably should have done in advance just to see if it would actually work before doing it on the stage.
You think?
It's hilarious, though. You got to go out there and see it. I mean, and I got to say, Musk is not very impressive in that video. He looks pretty nonplussed about the whole situation. But, okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about Hong Kong, and this does feed into one of our out there topics, which is why we're going to start with this. We've got actually a couple more out there to give you. First was the Cybertruck, and they claim they've got 200,000
already
pre-orders.
Pre-ordered.
Yeah.
Even as hideous as they are.
You take a look at it, and you tell me if you believe that for 1 second, that there are 200,000 people that want to drive that piece of junk around. I'm sure it's nice. I'm sure it's awesome, just like all the Teslas. But, again, it looks like the DeLorean had, an out-of-wedlock child or something. It's very strange looking. All right, so.
With a Hummer, maybe.
Big news out of Hong Kong. I mean, this is big news. They had huge elections over the weekend, and 71% turnout, which is almost 3 million people turned out in these elections. I mean, can you imagine if we had 71% turnout in our elections? Now, the town councils, the various councils throughout Hong Kong were basically made up of pro-Beijing politicians. And now, it was 10-1 pro-democracy. The pro-Beijing, the pro-Chinese politicians were all thrown out of office. And now you've got a bunch of, in fact, some of the protesters, some of the leaders of the protests even got elected over there into these town councils. And now 17 of 18 of the councils are now controlled by pro-democracy people. So, big changes afoot in Hong Kong. And we're going to have to wait to see the end of the story because, as we talked about last week, the Chinese are not particularly willing to give up on this because it would be a huge loss of face if, one, they don't exert control over Hong Kong, or if somehow Hong Kong votes for independence, which is what they're talking about doing. And so, all we got to do is look back to what happened in Spain when Catalonia tried to become independent. Remember, they tried those people for treason. Okay, so what do you think China's going to do? Because China doesn't have the same rule of law like we have. This has got to be a huge insult to the face of Chairman Xi. And so what is going to happen next? Are we going to see a military invasion or something? I don't know. But keep your eyes on Hong Kong. Happy for the people there that they actually elected some pro-democracy people. Lots of waving of American flags. I'll tell you, they frankly put us to shame in their willingness to stand up because they have nothing. They've got umbrellas and gas masks, and that's about it. They don't have guns or anything else, and they're standing up to the Chinese military and the police and fighting back.
Slingshots and bricks.
Exactly. They have basically nothing. And in China, some major things are afoot with their pig population. And I just think, when does this arrive in the United States? Because do you know, and this is part of the out there, can you believe that about 40% of the total pig population in China has been killed in the past year, either died or been killed because they were sick from African swine flu and pig Ebola. Pig Ebola and swine flu.
So that's putting a hurting on their food supply.
Oh, big time. First of all, the Chinese love pork. That's their favorite meat. And you are talking about hundreds of millions of pigs are dead now. Almost half of the total population of the Chinese pig farms. Now, that's resulted in an over 125% price increase since just this July for pig meat. So that means it's more than doubled since July. It's unbelievable. It's also driven prices up by like 40% in Europe. And you just wonder what happens next. I mean, how is this killing all the pigs? I mean, it's killed 40%. Could it kill even more? And could it come over here?
Could it move to other animals?
Well, that's the other thing, Pat George. I mean, you start hearing about pig Ebola, and you hear about how these things can mutate and jump from species to species. So could it move to other animals? Could it move to humans? I don't know. I mean, time will tell. But some major things going on with disease and famine in China, and how is that going to play into the whole situation? I mean, we remember during, Chairman Mao's years, I mean, they starved something like 60 million people over there in China. They just didn't give them food. So they've got no qualms about just not shipping food to their people. And what is going to happen with this situation?
That
Time will
video
tell.
I was showing you while you were talking, you were doing a great job of talking and not being distracted by my video. But that was in China. That was in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I took that video.
Yeah.
And it was all pork.
Ooh.
Or pigs.
Butchered up and laid out there for you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I bet it smelled wonderful.
No, it did not.
Anybody that's been to a taxidermy shop or something like that knows that, it's a powerful smell.
Pungent.
Butchered raw meat is powerful smell.
It just smells bloody, yes.
Well, staying in Asia for our final little out there segment, we just wanted to cover something. Now, this is a new trend. The death of privacy is an overall trend, and people say, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you shouldn't need privacy, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now there's a hotel in Japan, the Asahi Ryokan Hotel, and they allow you to put your money where your mouth is, basically, or put your mouth where your money is, maybe. And if you rent room number 8 there, it has a webcam set up in the room. And by the way, it's a very small room. You can go out there and find this online and watch some of the folks who have stayed there. And if you'll stay in room number 8 and you're on camera the entire time you're in the room, you can rent that room for the equivalent of about $1 per night. It's about 100 yen. The regular price on that is $27. So if you're willing to give up your privacy, you could save $26 a night, folks. What a deal. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.